Hello everyone, today we talk about exams planning at university. Yes, this is another lazy day in which I didn't have enough time to prepare for the next video, or I could have done it actually, as I do always in half an hour before I start, especially with the von Clausewitz series. But I said, let's talk about this because I presume that of course the contents you're searching for mostly in this channel is the merely historical one. Also, the von Clausewitz videos, as I point out repeatedly, do not have a great success, unfortunately, as instead it's the ones that technically, at least from a theoretical point of view, should be the most useful, especially if you're interested in military history. And that, of course, what is fascinating about it, it's saying, let's hear it at the perspective on this historical topic that I maybe already know, but, want to hear Schwerpunkt's perspective on, or maybe learning something new from it. But I wouldn't like to give for granted that this channel could be useful in other ways for learning history, just also in terms of method, right, in timing and how to schedule work from university, even from school, right. This video is actually thought right now. I decided in the last 5 minutes about university. We could make a video also about school. Right, I see that some of you, at least, not many actually, but they're still in high school. That could be an interesting topic. But on school especially, I have certain specific thoughts that are a bit extreme. So I will think of something some other time. For what concerns university, is mostly like a job. Right, in many ways, right? After all, it's a long-term commitment. You have to basically work slash studying, because what's the difference? Technically speaking, also think about researchers, as I do. We get the scholarship for doing it. It's not anything different from a work, except it has its own advantages. One advantage of studying history, maybe you will not become a millionaire through history teaching. Albeit I've read that statistically speaking, at least in the U.S., there are more millionaires among school teachers than among lawyers. That's another thing. But at least you will hopefully work. You will not necessarily sleep at night, but at least if you do, you will do it at home, or at least you will not be forced to do it somewhere else. You will, after all, have this a lot of time that is needed for. Of course, for this type of work, but it's there is actually a balance between the research and teaching. There are two very important things to stress as well. And in fact, this is a perspective that you get maybe when you get a bit ahead and you start detaching yourself from the days of the university. That are the days that are, let's be honest about it, to me at least, were extremely boring. Right? I know that there are many people that actually study at university because kind of they have to, and why not? I presume most people in at least in some of the most developed Western countries at least now say, okay, well, yeah, university is kind of a necessary step to take. In other places, it's really not a big deal, and of course it really depends what you want to do in your life. There are people who have maybe already a business that the family runs, and it doesn't quite require many titles, just skill and practice. So it's really a different life choice, and I've always thought that actually, yes, university is very important. Objectively, it does make an important difference whether you study there or not, but it's not something that you should consider if you don't have a degree, whatever it is, especially if it's a bachelor, but even a master's at this point are becoming ridiculous, and I suspect PhDs, as far as I see abroad, are also really going badly downhill, and that's why I always pick up this need of a reform of education on a broader scale, which is an issue we will have to address in the world, right? It's not something we can allow ourselves to wait for unless we want a specific type of political and social system to take place, which is already started from some one generation, let's say. I don't think it's particularly good, but in fact, university is something that for some you just have to do it, right? At least for me, speaking for personal experience, I've always thought I would study at university, would get a degree, would ever explain to me what it actually was, right? I'm an only son. My parents are, enough older than me to, come from another time in this regard of education, because things change indeed. Even in this regard, I also studied in other fields, and I've done this thing in history completely on my own. In many ways, I had to learn all the things on my own, and I've never met a person that told me what the thing would have really been like. Right, some advice, some tips, they turned out to be true, but the whole thing, essentially speaking, I mean, it's remarkable how I've never actually got someone that seemed to be interested in telling me how it was, right? Or, people generally speaking are interested in telling their own side of the story for some specific bias, either for criticizing a system, right? It happens all the time. If you went through the thing, when finish high school, start asking people around, and you get sometimes one thing and it's perfect opposite as an opinion, and you say, what the hell? And you can already at that point start realizing that maybe these sources are not completely true, or at least that they want to present you just one side of the story. Also, different faculties, different universities, different classes are different institutions, public, private, this is very, at countries especially, right? I presume that what I will be saying today is not excessively relatable for many of you that come from very, very different educational systems from the one I got used to, and I see it constantly when I speak with foreigners in general, that we had different experiences after all in this regard. This is no video now to even explain that, but it's kind of interesting at certain levels. I also don't want to be too specific, saying, maybe in that country it's better or worse, like in generating, because simply I don't even know, like I haven't been there, I can't understand something, maybe true, of course, with understanding what these people learned or how they see the thing like, but generally speaking, that I'm very polemical against regarding to what education has come to this day, or what it's always been, right, in spite of changes, and not in the alternate, let's say, progressive side of, right, changing those new models that are allegedly so, smart and effective that only certain countries do, and they're so, they're better than everybody else, right? There's an anti-historical explanation, because to different countries correspond different political and social realities, and it's not about saying that there is an absolute standard of better or worse, right? It all depends what does that country want, right? Think about ex-socialist countries, for example, have a much higher emphasis on labor force that they have to increase after they open their economies to the world markets that maybe they didn't even know how to work. But when I studied economics, I had some professors that had gone to Russia to teach them objectively what the capitalistic system was actually about, because they were used just to say, okay, in 10 years I have to do this amount of stuff, and then no matter what, you will have to do it. And so, for example, they have today still less years of school, mandatory school, right? Other countries are, should, and generally speaking, with advancement, with the development, it's evident that the amount of education generally increases, and that's why also, in part, even the quality of the relative degrees has sunk. Also, if you think about it on the market, right, if everybody has a degree, it's obvious that this is, less, even if education had remained, the quality of it had remained the same, let's say, but it has less value. So it's sometimes very complicated to make a good point in saying, you just for being from there, or for having gone to that university, or from having studied that faculty, you are that kind of person. It doesn't work like that, right? Also, the evaluation systems are getting very much standardized, in my opinion. It's like now getting a bachelor, especially, or master, it's largely a pro forma thing, right? You get it because you have to get it. You usually always get the same mark. and there is not much the sense anymore that after all that there should be such a great distinction, which, after all, if there are effective ways to have made you work all those years and to certify that, it's a point. If it is instead just because maybe some country wants to show, for example, that they have all geniuses, they want to sell to these people in the market, which usually happens within the country itself. Like maybe certain areas that are poorer tend to say, look at our students are better and give them higher marks, right? So there are this kind of problems sometimes, but we skip them. Today we talk specifically about how to schedule an exam, and generally speaking, how to get it through the whole degree in a functional way, right? Because I presume, at least from my experience, that the greater problem in absolute terms, and exactly that thing that nobody tells you before university, is how to study. Like how to get the thing done, because at the end of the day, the only reason why you get to university, aside from people that have a quite 19th century, let's say, romantic type of relation with studies, for which they start university and they never ended, even in 20 years. The reason why you're there, yeah, of course, it's learning along the way, and sure, it's the most important thing. In philosophically speaking, that you actually learn something from it. But aside from the fact that, in my opinion, the most important thing you can learn from university is now to be autonomous, so that you don't need to depend on university on your education and on your personal improvement, right? And universities, generally speaking, especially if you are kind of a good student, give you that opportunity, right? And you should be able to realize that, to take it. But it's to get exams done, right? I honestly don't remember anymore. I have a sense of malaise when I think back about university studies, not because I did bad, but because it was boring, because I was obsessed. Sometimes I still dream, right, in something goes on in my subconscious. This idea, especially when I have a close deadline, like right now, for example, in perspective, is how much time and work, and which specific work, by the way, does it take to get the exam done, right? And there are lots of exams at university. At least I had sometimes, I don't know, one year I had something like 13 exams, right? And I know that a very few years before I started studying at university, it was actually even worse in my country, were like 30 exams. It was something incredible. They had these people that stayed there for years and years, not because they were lazy students, but because objectively, it was that messed up. They had to study like thrice the amount of books that, for example, I had to do, that I think were even enough, right? Sometimes quantity is not really quality, right? You can't build, maybe, notionistically speaking, build some culture like that, aside from the fact, where your frontal cortex is fully formed at 24 years old. You can even study things, but you will forget them, right? The years in which you're kind of like a sponge like crazy are up to that point, but also in perspective, it really depends. To me, the most crucial years in absolute terms in a person's education are 11 to 13 years old. Those are those in middle school, which what you learn there, you will remember it on your deathbed. Especially learning languages, maths, how to do something reactively without thinking about it. High school students are already old people. If you are a high school student, if you have done poorly previously, there's not much chances, right? Up to 24 years you can learn things, but if you haven't built a structure properly within your brain within the years before, it's tough, right? And personally, I must tell you that in middle school there are things I learned well, other things that I didn't learn, and I can say I still have problems, but I realized that in perspective that I could have done much better, just in life, if I had just focused those years on this kind of education. And I presume that nobody from that age watches Schwerpunkt, but just in case also maybe for your children, or if you want to take my advice, quite humbly, I'm not a parent, I'm not going to teach you how to be one, but just consider that this is scientific stuff. Like, you should take that quite seriously into consideration. And it's tough because usually at 11, 13 is when kids began to be rebellious, and they don't listen to you. And that's all part of the mechanism in many ways that's useful also in other ways. But let's say, 24 years old should be in theory also when you finish university. In that regard, I also together I think 2 years. High school, in school I got always I did always well, right? I never lost a year. I had maybe problems with certain subjects, but they were, I fixed them, so it wasn't a problem. I was a functional human being. Then eventually studied 1 year of economics. Then throughout my historical studies, I abandoned economics. When I studied history, I lost another year. Right, so I basically finished, started a PhD when I was 26, right? And this is interesting because usually, I feel myself very old in this regard. I mean, more or less, my colleagues have the same age, if not, they're even older, right? Because in there is all the problem of the selection today. Bachelor and masters do not read selection; you just pay, you start studying. That's it. With PhD, I know people, some friends of mine that I found during the selection had gone there for like a third or fourth time. It's very frustrating, and it wasn't just the only university where they had tried. So just think about these long-term projects you fundamentally depend on, even just by fortune, right? I got in. I must say I was very lucky. It was an extraction thing during this election that I saw in front of me with all the other people, so that there could be no doubt about the fairness of this election. And I'll tell you, if it had gone differently, if that guy had picked up that, envelope rather and had done another, I wouldn't be even doing what I'm doing. And those are life-changing experiences. So that's when the thing starts getting messed up, but that's also a point where we stop today so that we concentrate just on the bachelor and the master. I would say that there is not an enormous difference between, of course, the method that you should use between the bachelor and the master, because technically it's the same. The difficulty may increase. At that point, you just have to increase the amount of studying, right? But the method is very important. And what I wasn't taught at all when I started university is how to do that, right? I was very... for example, I think I also quitted economics because I didn't know how to make a university exam at the beginning. It was difficult for me to even know what exactly I had to learn. That may be a problem because at least that institution seemed to me to be practically oriented. That is, it's as if those kids had known already what they had needed to study because someone had been there, their parents had told them how the work practically is. And I found that I wanted to study even at that level certain more theoretical stuff. It doesn't mean I'm impractical or abstract, but there were objectively certain minutiae that the professors weren't particularly clear about, so that I didn't even to study the whole thing, but that they were given to us as books, etc. But to me, it wasn't at all clear what I had to do. Nobody ever put in front of me a sheet of paper saying, look, you have to do this, this, and that, right? When I got studying history, that was instead extremely clear, right? Because, of course, it was a less specific thing in many ways. It's not like in economics, you have to study law. I did mathematics well, for example. That I usually in high school that was the I had to struggle the most for. But eventually, in fact, I had learned it at that point. But when it came to I didn't know, for example, to study law specifically. I wasn't given the entire civil code, and theoretically, I had to study it all, and it turned out I didn't have to, but nobody told me, right? You're talking about this level, specifically speaking. It was obviously ridiculous. I could have never studied the way I thought I was required. With history, it was very different because, to me, you give me a history book, I immediately fall for it. I get interested in what it's written. I got amazed because, of course, at the time I also didn't know much myself. It's not that I started studying history from a serious point of view quite late, after all. Given that biological timing, I was talking to you about before. And however, it's like, getting the ideas right, getting the complexive side of the story right, that is very important. It's kind of easier. Many people say, well, studying history, it's easier than studying, in fact, things like law or chemistry. Well, I think at the beginning it is. Like, it's obvious, right? I found lots of people that had actually started studying history with me the first year, that went there just literally, and they told me by admission, because it wasn't mathematics or law to learn, because for them it was too hard, even to learn things by heart. Oh, poor dear. Those people are out of there at this point. I haven't seen them all, right? I'm still here. I'm doing this research. Those people reasoned like that are those older people that are abandoned, right? And that tells you how, even in history, you cannot think to say, okay, I study history because I don't like scientific things. No. If you don't like scientific things, you shouldn't even study at university. Doesn't matter what kind of topic or faculty you choose, right? Because a person that thinks that studying history doesn't require knowing things like mathematics or chemistry or engineering or astronomy or whatever you may think, or even economics for that matter, right? Or sometimes even mathematics or history of science or technology. I mean, you cannot understand the world. There is no understanding of the world without scientific background, as much as there is not without humanistic background. What it seems to me in that proportion is that, if you study other more practical or oriented subjects, you may, be smart and quick and fast, which, for example, I wasn't at the beginning when I started studying economics. But it seems to me that once you learn the skills by work, it's just reapplicating them over and over again. When people say, well, humanities and history, which is studied just like usually social science, and I think specifically history, because in the humanities I've seen also a lot of other people. I've seen archaeologists, I've seen philosophers, I've seen art historians, I've seen philologists, and I got a very specific impression about them that, to me, it's to say the least, extremely different from historians, right? And it's not a sense of category, because in theory, I presume that there should be a sort of communion between, in fact, the various liberal arts, if you want. But it's a very different type of mindset that is built, because history properly doesn't have any specific ground. And you would say, well, that's why it's easy, right? Not exactly, because history forces you exactly to create your own base, your own plateau, right? The ground on which you have to start your own build, and nobody tells you how it is, right? So it is actually a huge opportunity to study history seriously in your life, because it brings you to this point where you're not depending on something that other people told you, right? It's also quite impolite to tell historians just repeat what other historians said. Actually, it's largely true, right, in technical terms. And to many historians also, the bad side of historians, it's often that one. I've found many professors that objectively didn't even know what was much of a autonomous thinking, because they were so obsessed to have that quote of that manual under their feet, without which they couldn't even go to the toilet, right? That they didn't grow up, right, as free-thinking minds, right, and just found the sanction, the legitimization of their authority, in fact, that they had quoted what the other experts said. What if the expert was wrong? They didn't care, of course, right? And this is the bad side. It happens dramatically. This is a problem you find everywhere, right? Sciences have enormous problems in this regard. There is even in fields that are close to history, like anthropology, when social sciences also met with psychology, with this broader, even political issues, that things become very ideological and very necessarily, I would say, sectorial. I don't know how to say that, but still pretending that there is a connection between everything, and not having the courage of objectively going there and saying, okay, well, maybe I can be from this field, but that's try to make me understand as a human being that can think about lots of things. If I can't understand autonomously something about this other subject myself, right? This is dying, right? And this is part of that danger I was telling you at the beginning, right? That we are just hyper specializing, which is fine, but as long as there is nothing that you add to that, as if you had to monomaniacally just fixate on that time and place, not seeing anything else for the rest of your lives, it's done, right? I've asked it. It's a story I tell every time. I asked a professor that was studying. There was an expert on a medieval city in the 14th century, and I needed information, bibliographical advice actually, about that same city in the first half of the 14th century. This guy had the guts to answer me that I should have known that he was expert in the second half of the 14th century, and that therefore he couldn't help me for the first one. You understand? Those are dangerous people, right? Those are very dangerous people, and because they cause that. Of course, I didn't answer. I don't even remember who he was, but not surprisingly. But that is dangerous because it gives a bad example. It doesn't give you a method, doesn't give you a teaching, and presumes that you have just to follow the trail without thinking, like a sheep, right? Honestly, in history, I haven't found much of this. Maybe a guy was just lazy and didn't want to answer me. In fact, I didn't even know him. So, I'm open to this. And I'm open to this exactly because I presume that the world is varied and it cannot be framed easily in just one narrow track and category. But the point I was making is that when you study history, you have to at least make the effort to think that there is something new that you have to add to it. Because I presume that if you don't do that, I know that there are people who just like to follow not the authority. I mean, there's nothing even bad in that. Like in saying, okay, I want to, I fall in love with the scholar and I want to study everything he wrote and then add something to that. But just following that guy, right? For example, I never done that. I've never cared largely about historiography, which is also a fault, by the way. But I've always liked mostly to find out things by myself, right? And even without working with the expert of the thing. Just, you're a historian, you take your own bibliography, you start studying that, you start studying sources. The expert can help you, but you shouldn't live under his, umbrella just because, and unfortunately, many universities all around the world, it's like this. I've experienced even in my country. I had the luck to study also in my city and in a university that, in fact, my country is regarded as, nobody cares where you come from in terms of scholarly background, right? Partly because it's the capital of my country, but secondly, and it was this tradition of, getting kind of the best from all the country, and they were unavoidably all about different topics, right? So they had to invent this kind of, and maybe I'm influenced by this, who knows? But in many other places, there is a kind of a mob-like attitude. Like if you don't research the thing that professor wants, he doesn't even make you start a PhD. Or still, you should have this kind of reverential attention just for what that person is studying, going to him just or her to say if you could make a thesis with them. I've been raised in this sense in a context. I must even thank my tutor that she followed me for all this time, and at some point maybe I will even say who she is, but she never gave a freaking damn. Like the bachelor thesis, of course, I did it on her topic because she's actually one of the greatest experts in the world to that, but I didn't follow the same topic. My master was like 700 years later in the Middle Ages, and also what I'm doing now is partially unrelated to anything she has done, and she's always been fine with that, and I think most tutors should be like that as well, right? I made a video about how to write a good thesis and all this stuff, and it wasn't even too much because I mixed bachelor, master, PhD, and that's something maybe I will have to split at some point. But for what exams are concerned, at least, you're a bit freer. I mean, at the beginning, of course, it's normal to be intimidated by, I don't know, the professor. You don't know how university works. I personally never, even if I don't like to admit it, I think I'm a fairly competitive person. Like I'm ambitious, and this also put me in trouble, and because I behaved in haughty and other, contemptuary fashion. A good advice: never contradict a professor, right? Because I was saved, but like for 3 or 4 different times, which is I consider myself miracled, right? And I answered, pretty. I don't even know how to say that, but I'd say arrogantly to a professor, and I was even right, telling the truth. But you don't know how the guy's gonna take that. So always, do your thing. Do not expose yourself too much. The first year of university, you always find the guys that won't show that they know the thing, that always raise hands. They want to show off, and that's silly. After the first year, nobody cares about that anymore if it's a sane person. But you have mostly with the exam this relation with mostly, of course, the subject and the professor. You don't know really how it's going to go, especially in the first times. And you presume that at the beginning, at least when you start studying history, that there is this, you don't have much of an orientation. Like, you have no idea objectively how much there is out there. You actually think there is way more than you think, in the sense that you can't flip everything. It's as much as you like in terms of perspective, etc. You don't know where, what is it you have, even just in terms of sources of evidence, what there is not, what historiographically is being written. So that's something that maybe we should make a video on specifically, because it's very, I think for our generations it's very important, because as I often said, what is being written at this point, historiographically speaking, is too much. It's too much. Like, at this point, we're starting to arrive to the point PhDs easily cannot contemplate the covering of the entire historiography on a certain topic. That's also why the thing gets down to hyper specialization, because sometimes even for just a fairly simple topic, you would have to spend all the days of all the years of the research just in finding out what is being written, right? And it kind of never ends, because naturally everything is connected, historically speaking. It's dramatic, and especially for the second half of the Middle Ages, let's say, things start to be overwhelming. But let's say that everything at the beginning is actually way simpler than it seems, and I think we should all take a pragmatic approach to this, to exam making in this regard, because one of the greatest obstacles at the beginning is just psychological. You think that this exam is how difficult it's going to be, what kind of questions you can ask, how much do you have to know? These are all things unfortunately for you will learn throughout, just through experience by trying that. But it's not even so dramatic as it sounds. Personally, I had very few exams that went badly. I think I didn't pass just, I think, 2 exams once, and another time it was like a pre-exam, right? It was just for getting points eventually for the exam, and where everybody had failed, even the ultra hyper intelligent people that you use as a thermometer in that regard for understanding whether the thing was difficult or not, like at school. But as you know, I've always thought I'm very average intelligence, right? You can't cultivate your own intelligence. That's what education is really about. Objectively, more people are educated in theory, but let's say in absolute terms, on average, like, in the more they are intelligent. You are not born intelligent, right? People are not born intelligent. They have to exercise their mind, and there is no comparison between a person that has a structured, comprehensive education, someone that objectively hasn't at least bother him or herself to do it, right? Maybe they may have acquired an enormous experience in other fields, but still, structured education, it's something that that has its own purpose for a specific scientific and rational reason, right? It's not just for people waving, a sheet of papers in which they say that they are graduated or something. Just saying that, however, of course, what at least what bachelors and masters are concerned, like, it's not this enormous deal of education anymore. exams, I wanted to say something important that I forgot. But, you know, how to approach exams and the method, right? So, you generally have, and this can vary a lot, so that's what the disclaimer at the beginning was about. Like, it could be that your university works completely differently, right? My university, my country, generally speaking, there is a usually, well, with history, of course, it's a subject that is mostly theory, right? But if it had been a more practically oriented subject, you know, there is also a lot of practice. Like, the formula is very simple: a lot of theory and a lot of practice, right? And that's actually very good in my opinion. Like, it's pressuring, it's hard, but it's tough, but you get it done. Another thing, never listen to people tell you, oh, that thing is so difficult, right? Everybody says, well, what is the professor like? Is it difficult, the exam? Never believe to corridor voices. Like, listen to them, get informed in that regard, but do not yourself get influenced by them, because that chit chat for largely cowardly people. They're just freaking out every time they have to make an exam, right? As I told you, I think I'm a sensitive and even anxious person by a certain degree, but I have my self-control, and then every time I made an exam, I was the only cold-blooded person, right? This was told to me even in high school. You know, this guy may have, remember my professor of, well, I can't tell which one, because otherwise you understand where he come from. She told me, you know, he could even be freaking out within, but he will never show any sign of that, right? He's cold as stone. And you know, evidently I'm not, but I like to maintain contain. In fact, exactly because I'm fairly tense, but never to, you know, to overwhelm me. And, you know, outside the door, while, you know, exams were being done and we were waiting outside, usually there is the crowd of anxious people that gathers around me, because I inspire confidence, you know, and calm, and I always say not to worry, everything is going to be fine, and provide information to. And actually, I don't think it's much a matter of character. It's simply the fact that I usually arrive to the exam prepared, and I could tell to other people, you have to say this and that, because that's what the point. And those people were anxious because, of course, they knew they hadn't studied, right? But at least I passed as this person, and there were kind of other funny anecdotes that, you know, was put in, you know, in between, like, you know, professors started thinking something about they stereotyped me in some ways. Whatever, that were kind of weird stuff. I will say me another time. And the thing has always, in fact, and that's exactly the point of the story. You should get to the exam, and we'll see now how, always prepared, right? That's the trick. Like, you would say, what's the trick of passing exam, even in schools, right? And passing examinations. Is there a trick for that? Yes, there's a beautiful trick. Study. It's the easiest trick, right? If you really want to fool everybody, study. You will know the thing. You will answer the question, and it's it, right? And you will earn in terms of moral, as a moral achievement, a moral accomplishment. People will think you're objectively functional, and so on. And I tell you, as a person that was objectively always among the best of his class, but never the best, right? There were always a handful of other people who were better than me in the class, but I still passed for the person that, after all, studied, did the thing done. It was reliable enough because, you know, he was usually, not always, unfortunately, but usually prepared, right? And the reason, I can tell, the only secret in that is to be prepared, right? The problem is how to be prepared, right? This is an enormous topic, actually, because it's a matter of psyche, right? And not everybody has the same mind, but objectively there is a good enough and functional and, you know, the most pragmatic method that, at least in my experience, works more or less like this. So I'm not a procrastinator, first of all, right? I can't take that, exactly because that makes me anxious. Like, I can't think that I now will, you know, say, okay, well, for today just have fun, then eventually we will start. No, let's do the thing now, then I will have fun. And that is even more driving. In some ways, you will say, but then, well, you know, maybe the time you have fun and study is the same. What's the difference? So, evidently not. Evidently, the concept is that you have to study at least every day, right? That's fundamental. That is valid in every field, in school and university, wherever you find yourself, to make it work. The constants is for the most important thing. You may even work just a few every day, but you have to do it every day, possibly consistently, but still never to break the chain, right? Because if you break the chain, you distract yourself, you lose focus, you lose concentration, and it's tougher for your mind to put itself on the same track, especially if you waste yourself afterwards. So also a healthy lifestyle, which includes, unfortunately, even, for example, going to sleep not necessarily early, but always the same hour, and sleeping always enough, like 7-8 hours, which can take a lot, right? To objectively sometimes say I sleep too much, then I don't sleep because I want to study, make more work, and say, oh, I feel wasted and the work sucks, right? So it's not that you really want to do it, but it usually works like that. Also, take things like alcohol or other the distractions of the sort, like, kind of easy, right? I personally have always drank in my life, but I think I never got drunk a single time. And in general, I don't see the point of administrating myself alcohol, just for the sake of it, just maybe for the taste of the beverage, not because there is alcohol in it, right? If you need alcohol to stay awake or alive, wherever there's a problem with you, you should fix that seriously from a healthy point of view. Secondly, another point is to be naturally to have your own, not to be distracted while you do it, right? If you studying, for example, for school times, like 2 hours a day, if you really do it every day and you study very well, that is, in those 2 hours, maybe you take some breaks, but fundamentally you do those 2 hours continuous studying is excellent. It's a very good thing. Sometimes, actually, the moment I studied the toughest was in school, telling you the truth. Sometimes I came to study even and seriously for several hours in a day, like 7-8, but I mean for really studying, that is, I obliged myself to remain concentrated on the book, which is crazy because you shouldn't do that, right? It's not even so productive. University, you have the first advantage is, of course, that you don't have to go there every day, or at least you don't have to forcefully. Not necessarily, depends what it is. Of course, there are certain, if you studied medicine, that some classes are mandatory and naturally should be so. With history, you are kind of more relaxed in this regard. It was the same before. Many people like university life for the sake of it. I personally didn't. Like, I hated it, right? Always, if I had to date someone, I prefer to do it on the internet, in my own city, going to university and trying to hit on some. I never liked it. Never liked it. University life is boring, it's messy, there are too many people, right? Maybe also because my university is fairly large, it's only 3 kilometers from my home, but so it's not a big deal. It feels like home in some ways. There were also various branches that are even closer to where I live. It felt like home, but I never liked to stay like in a room crowded with other people, sneezing and saying stupid stuff and with noise. I like to be on my own. I like to be in a quiet place, to take my time, to reflect, concentrate, right? And so the first thing is technically, so we were saying concentration for studying, do not get distracted, which is a very difficult thing to do, especially now that everybody has a phone in hand. But you should really make that effort. Like, if you have, especially if you're, I presume when you're older in this path, you become less resistant to temptations, but at least you have enough rationale to say, okay, well, now I will do it later. And you mostly try to arrange your day in a way you can schedule that effectively, and that's what this whole thing is learned to be like. When you're young, I don't know about you, but it was like, a Catonian individual. Like, I like to impose myself stoically every single damn thing. I like to suffer in this regard about it. This is all earned. This is all good work. You will come back to you. Positively, and I managed to impose a discipline on myself, and it was fairly harsh, right? Even maybe uselessly. I tend to see it with Schwerpunkt as well. I spent this enormous amount of energy even maybe for something that doesn't quite work, but I need it. It's kind of a cathartic experience. In a Jungian perspective, I think as if I get renewed and there's this improvement. It's a moral thing, really. But this is me, at least. It should be working universally, in my opinion, because we know that human mind actually does work like that. But it's really important. Like if you're used to really do nothing all the time, that's why I was talking about middle school or even before, especially in primary school. In primary school, you don't learn how to shut up and stay seated. You will not learn it for your entire life, and all the people in your entire life will look at you, look at the brat, right? And psychologically speaking, that's also you will be growing up with people giving you fake smiles and trying to get rid of you, and you will grow up as a psychologically messed up person as well. So there are very important moments in your life in which you should keep you should be imposed discipline sometimes, but mostly that should be done for the aim of developing it on your own, right? That's where your parents or whoever you're being raised with should be about. That is an enormous responsibility from that side, unfortunately, because the child doesn't quite understand at some point. It's all very difficult, and once again, I will not discuss it today. But the point is that you need this fundamentals, and it can be silly, and sometimes I give it for granted. But objectively, if you pretend that you want to learn something, you do something in your life, you can't even stay 2, 3, 4 hours studying straight. Right, maybe with some break, but saying, okay, I will dedicate this important chunk of my day to learning, because I need to achieve that. You will get nowhere. Maybe, I don't know, the theoretical thing is not for you. You will do better in a practical way. You will do well in work, but let's say the improvement that the theoretical exercise requires is very often much harsher and productive, though, in this sense, than something practical. Like everybody likes, I think, I also like to do practical things. Like now I'm writing this work, I like just to, change something in my bibliography that doesn't require particular interpretation, because it's very mechanical work, and say, fine, I just have to do that. When you have to start writing a concept, that requires a lot of energy. So your brain gets tired, right? It's energy consuming. It's very difficult. Like intellectual work, it's exhausting from a physical point of view, and it's properly difficult, right? That never give for granted how much you can achieve mentally speaking, because that's what humans dramatically underestimate constantly about themselves, their brain. It is true. We could make an enormous, even just people that say we use just 20% of our brain. Even if you use 25%, you could change your entire life for that 5%, right? And it's relatively easy, especially if you get used to it. That's very important, in my opinion. So this reality, of course, there is also the most important point. Actually, you should have a motive for doing this, right? Motives cannot be taught. Everybody has its own. I cannot give you any advice, but obviously there must be a motivation for this. If you just went to university because you were expected to do, and you don't give a damn about it, and you don't see the point, well, you're just lying to yourself. I know it, because when I started studying economics, I did it because it was a very good university, and I had entered it in the selection. I had made it, and I said, maybe I would like to study something else, but this sounds like a good thing. It's socially maybe, expectable for me to enter here. And I went there, and economics was cool. Like, I learned a lot of things, but it wasn't simply for me. And I didn't waste it, because I worked, and even the rest of the year, I started studying other stuff, languages, and so on. It was great. In many ways, and you may even want to take the so-called sabbatic year after high school. It's positive. If that really helps, it's not just an excuse to get wasted every day, but it's really a matter of why you're there in the first place. I, for example, started studying history because I didn't have any expectation in terms of anything, in terms of career, social prestige or whatever, but because I freaking love history and I like it, and that passionates me, and that's what I wanted to do. And it turned out it was right. I like it. I don't think I'm a terrific historian, honestly, but it was the right choice. Probably, I don't know. I could have done something else. As you know, I tried military academy. I tried medicine as well. And maybe at this point, for one thing gone in a different way, I may have been somewhere else. But I'm here now, and I'm not justifying my choice, right? If there is something that I never did was, no, it starts, because I knew that history was the only thing I had fun with, so I was trying to justify the rest. And that was kind of a mistake. I would never do that mistake. I mean, try other stuff if that can really help you, but don't lie to yourself, because that's bad. And that's possibly the only time I lied to myself, saying, okay, I'll try this. At least I was fair. But I immediately recognized that also because I didn't get I wasn't used to lie to myself, that it wasn't the right choice. So the first thing that, at least when you go to university, the first year, that it's different, it's classes. So as I've told you, I don't like classes at all. I don't like to listen to professors unless they say something particularly interesting, but let's be honest, after a certain time it's boring, right? It's kind of ironic because I make these videos that last 4 hours, and I understand professors that talk for hours, because it's kind of funny, and it's kind of funny to torture people. Let's be honest about it. But it's for the person that is from the other side, it's not necessarily this great experience. I remember falling asleep sometimes. I literally, I never quite achieved it, but I was about to, and it was boring. And the most important thing, if it was one class, I got annoyed because I had to go there while I could stay home or doing something else, and instead I had to go back and forth from university. It took some time. Boring. If it was if I had 5 classes sometimes in a day, it is, who the hell has the energy to follow 5 classes in a day and to be effective in it? So that there is something wrong maybe at that point of level teaching. And also professors usually are lost a bit in their in the clouds, and they don't care about that pragmatic thing, right? I remember, for example, I told you about my problems with mathematics in high school. It turned out, I was even blaming kind of myself, saying, why am I so, do I take bad marks? It turns out that I just needed someone to explain me how the thing was, right? But my teacher was exceptional, even taught at university, but she wrote a pair of things on the dashboard, and then she pretended everybody should understand and to know, and she wouldn't even show practically what you have to do to solve an exercise as a simple information, right? I went for the first, private teacher. She explained me everything, and I started doing well in maths, right? It's that easy, right? If teachers were educated to be not just, lost out there, but to telling people what they have to do, right? And that's why I'm making this video, so we get finally to the point, so I don't sound like the teacher lost into the clouds. So the class is it useful to follow? Well, aside from these limits, theoretically, yes. At least you know what you're talking about. There is one problem, though, that you cannot know when you start the classes, is that, how much the teacher is actually teaching what you need to know at the exam, or how much they're basically just, giving this formal explanation, and that eventually the only serious work is the one you will have to do at home on the books, right? And most of the times it's the latter, right? Unless they don't make you, they don't, some professors objectively aside that there are certain bureaucratic problems in terms that there have to be a certain amount of people in the class, right? Sometimes I was lucky, it was we were just 4 or 5, but we'd been 2. Legally speaking, the lesson couldn't even take place, right? And the course had to be suspended, which had happened once. So I was grouped with I was doing the bachelor. I was grouped with a master class, and I didn't do it well. So it was a scary subject. It was paleography that, as you know, I had a tormented relationship with, but it ended well and it did well. It was in a way a good a comforting experience. But generally speaking, there can be classes that are very practically oriented, in which the professor really says, look, if we do this stuff together in class, I think this is becoming ever more common in university, like I will spare you like these books for the exam, and basically at the exam I will make you some question, and depending on how much you've worked in class, I will give you a mark. That is clever to do, because after all, studying takes a lot of time, studying on your own, right? So you, in my opinion, you should always take those opportunities, right? I remember I had to do this apprenticeship, for example. It would have taken days and days of studying, of working actually, as I don't even remember what it was, not as a librarian, but I don't remember actually, but it took just to go 2 days in this monastery, lost in, I don't tell you where, that was, for studying certain manuscripts in those 2 or 3 days, and then eventually making a, paper about it when you came home. An enormous amount of time less. It was basically also a vacation in a very interesting historical place. Why not? Right, had the thrill of sleeping in a monastery in winter. It was even the snow. It was kind of fascinating. And the point there is take the opportunities as they come. Just be that quick to get it, right? To realize what it's concretely about. Do not be scared to ask, right? I know that when you're young, you're lazy or kind of timid in some way. You don't want to ask stuff, but ask things to professors, to secretaries, to your colleagues, and you will form an impression of what the thing will work like. So these practically oriented exams are very, classes, let's call it in this way, are very good. Just they're not so frequent. Like the majority of exams, and I think it's right to be so after all, are mostly about studying a lot of books. A lot of books can mean, given the modules that to each exam corresponds, like the average exam is like 3 or 4 books, which is not a lot, as you understand. I mean, it can be a lot depending on the time, and that's where the problem comes. You should understand, first of all, from the classes whether you can. You should always start going to first classes, the first lessons. You should understand if this class is fundamentally oriented towards the secondary model, if there's some shortcut, as I was saying before. Well, if it's about the second, so that you just have to learn the big hefty lesson, because it's objectively like an important exam about, I don't know, usually basic history exams are about that. You know that if it's the first exam of medieval history, you have to study the World Middle Ages, point, right? On manuals, of course, you don't have to have this in-depth knowledge of the whole thing, but still, that's what you have to learn, right? The professor may add an extra book close next to the 2 volumes of the manual, or maybe another that is maybe a book on method. Another one, maybe it's the professor's book, of course, because they want to cash with that, and so that more or less, and you should understand even in that regard what is that they usually ask at the exam. So it's very useful to, of course, know somebody that has made the exam from previous years, or maybe during the semester, whatever. It's we usually had 4 months, like the session. Yeah, we had 3 exam sessions in the year, usually something in between, I think, for the master's student. I don't remember even anymore. So that depending on which exams you do, you ask people, you ask your friends, your colleagues, and say, well, what do they ask, what they don't ask. Exams, I think, at least in my country, are legally public, right? So theoretically, everybody can enter the room and listen to. And sometimes I went even if the person didn't want, because usually they ask, and if for nicer you avoid. But it's fascinating to listen to an exam. I did many times. So most most of the times actually was just in the corridor, because I was waiting for either my tutor, or I had gone there for other reasons, and there were other professors in the same student that were making an exam to this kids of the first year. So sometimes you heard some of the worst stuff, like that the Carolingian Empire was invaded by the Huns, or that Carthage was a small town in Spain. Right? All this thing that people just really do not know. I don't know what the word they went there. So sometimes really it's really embarrassing. I remember I gave some advice to some people who were there to. But these are other unnecessary anecdotes. So that is very important to really, especially in the first years, to understand what concretely the whole thing is about, right? And the advice is stay open. Like, don't fixate exactly on, like, if you know that a professor has asked that specific question, do not think you can dodge the exam, but just by hoping to bet, like at the roulette, to bet on that question, and that will increase dramatically your chances of passing. You should set your mind on to think that you should study the entire thing you have been given, and that, as we were saying before, that's the real shortcut, right? That's the thing that will make it done. It's extremely important to stress. So I personally skipped classes, sometimes entirely, right? I went to the first lessons, I saw what it was about, I went away, I never showed up again, because I understood what it was about. And I was also quite haughty, as I was telling you before, so that it happens that for that a reason of hyper specialization that I went to, I remember once it was a modern history exam, and I don't remember what the professor said was there were lapses, let's say, but there were still mistakes, and I said, wow, I should be sitting here listening to be educated, and this person doesn't even know things. Like, I don't know what it was, but they were very I think that she had confused like the edict of Thessalonica with the Caracalla edict, but with the edict of Milan. She made a mess, and I said, I knew this stuff. I don't need to follow anymore. And so I did. And you earn a lot of time, because when you're there, to me at least, the first thinking was, I want to go home, I want to rest, I want to do something else, I don't want to be here. And so I did. And in that time I studied, right, which was way more useful than listening to someone speaking about things you still haven't focused on completely, and that are just words. They're not your own thoughts, after all. That can be provided. There are exams that are objectively interesting. There are also those exams that you don't really know whether you have to follow the lessons or not, so you kind of go because at least you've gone out, let's say, that day, and maybe you could skip this class, but you still made the effort of being at university. So okay, well, the classes maybe are close to each other. You follow them. I think I've never followed lessons from other classes. Sometimes when I was waiting, for other reasons, I sometimes entered, listen, like, it was a class. I opened the door. It was all girls. There were a lot of pretty ones, by the way. And so I said, what the hell is this? Only girls. Then I understood it was history of fashion. So I actually took the seat. It was an exam, telling the truth. And I spied on a bit of, no, I was not doing it. I was generally interested about it, and I said, well, what the hell? It turned out it was actually interesting. You expect history of fashion to be something frivolous or weird. Never be prejudiced. It was actually about economy of war. You wouldn't think. It was, about how, clothes were made during World War II, because of the international trade restriction, all this. So it was very interesting, actually. It was interesting also because it was an exam, right? Because I listened to what most of the students weren't very prepared, but some were, and they gave me interesting answers, and I even learned something about that. It was fascinating. But aside from this, this is the decision you have to take. And there is also another aspect of it, right? Because every lesson is interesting. Let's be honest about it. Sometimes, certain mandatory stuff that I didn't want to do turned out to be dramatically fascinating. Other times it's just about saying, this, let's say this class lasts, let's say, I don't know, 16 lessons. So it's like 32 hours. It's 16 times that I have to go out and I could do something else. Let's take into account how much I care about listening to the lessons and compare it with the time that it costs and how better can I do actually on my own, right? And that's the kind of reasoning you should have, so that you decide, okay, I skip all the lessons, but I studied the books well. At that point, you have no excuse. Right, you will probably even study unnecessary things because you will not understand. Well, before the exam, if the exam haven't still happened, you can never fully know what it will be asked at the exam. Sometimes at the exam there are so many books, right? Because there are also larger exams with 5-6 books. All this, that sometimes certain books are skipped. I remember once because also some students have personalized, customized exams, right? Because maybe they ask the professor, did this happen? Like I would like to study, to dip in this topic and study this one. So you read a book maybe you already had, and I did it sometimes. So sometimes I managed to say to the professor that we had previously agreed, which was not true because he didn't even remember about me, that we had to bring this book instead and another. So he didn't ask me a book that I hadn't studied because I had noticed before, I don't know why, talking with the people outside during the exams, that he mostly asked about that book and that I had taken like a secondary one that was not particularly important to study. I was planning on studying it like in the 2 hours that I had to wait before the thing. It was not a particularly good strategy. But, that's kind of rare. Usually, of course, what texts are presented, have to be presented for the exam, because you can see it on the internet on the professor's profile. They usually say, at least in my university, was like something, for those who follow the lessons, these books, and for those who don't, these ones. There are usually more in the latter case, which is obvious. And sometimes you have to put that into account as well. You may even study more, as I was saying before, but still saying, okay, I will do it, because maybe it's even interesting, right? Unfortunately, you can't always choose the topic of the exam. So that's also another sad part of the story. In fact, that's most of the reason why I found university boring, because there was a very few degree of customization, after all, of your degree. In this regard, you could choose a couple of stuff, differently. I always chose Byzantine history wherever it was, for example, Roman history as well. But that's also another thing. But at that point, so that we have finally framed what's the situation like, how should you study? Well, as I was saying before, this varies from person to person, so I don't have the magic formula to say how to prepare an exam properly. But the point should be this. So first of all, you have to make a bit of calculation of the complex amount of exams that you have. For example, when you start the first semester, let's call it in this way to make it simpler, that in the there is this period of lessons, of course, and then there is the exam sessions that eventually, if you don't pass, there is the next one, the other semester, just to make an example. It's usually 4 months, actually. But it goes on until you finish all the exams you take the degree after with the thesis. So you have this time, you know pretty much since the beginning what's the amount of time it takes to prepare the exam. Right, and the problem is that there are multiple exams. It's not that they're one at a time. So you have to make a bit of assessment here. How many exams you think you're going to be able to make during the session? The exam sessions usually lasts like 2 months, usually like 1 month and a half. So there is enough time to, let's say, prepare like 2 usually 2 exams at a time, at least in my opinion. It also depends what they are about. Also, there are these other exams you can kind of skip. Maybe there is. Most of my exams were oral examinations, so you have to approach it in a certain way. The others, usually those that allow you to skip the oral examination, were written exams. They can be like with the crosses, or with, was like an essay, or stuff like that. It's also an interesting strategy. It also depends which kind of mark you want to get, right? If you want to get the full mark, or just the satisfactory one, right? My advice is, especially as far as a bachelor thesis is concerned, who the hell cares about the mark? The sum of these marks will naturally make the points at the end of the degree. So that if you want to have a perfect degree, namely on the curriculum, which is completely useless, especially at the bachelor, do it. But just realize that you will have to repeat the exam if you took, for example, once I got a satisfactory mark, but I didn't like it, also because I was objectively mistreated by the professor, and I decided to make the exam once again, and then I thought, I did it and I passed with a better mark, and I said, what did I do it for, right? I could simply save time, right? It's not, it took me an overwhelming lot because it was like the first year, and it was a kind of easier also, but and I was experimenting in that regard. But consider that you compress your schedule, and that can cause anxiety, especially because you arrive at some point which you will lose an entire year, right? Even just maybe for one exam, right? For example, I lost 1 year during the historical studies because I wanted to do the bachelor thesis well, take enough time, and for like the time of one exam, basically, I didn't write that, and I lost an entire year, which was fine actually, because it turned out also for these elections afterwards, that's what made me progress, and I kind of recovered ideally this time, considering the average also what other selections take, unfortunately, as we've seen before. So it turned out to be a wise decision. Don't run. Just be aware that you have this time, and time is perhaps the most precious resource of all. So consider this will have an influence on it. It's not that I did it mostly. Of course, I didn't want to pay extra money to be there, but especially I didn't want to pay extra time. Yet, when it came to the thesis, I said, I want to write this properly. I don't want to hurry, so I did it in my own time. It was actually a much longer thesis than than normally a bachelor one is, and I could have done a much shorter one and saved the year. So that is also something you will have to learn to do by yourself, right? And never. I personally always grossly overestimated the importance of thesis. Generally speaking, I've always done excruciatingly long thesis, and for no good reason. But except I personally think I earned something from it in terms of my own, my personal enrichment, let's say, and so I had my own reasons that I can't explain now. But aside from this, you have to realize this timeline, right? Then how to study? Well, the first thing one should do, and although I'm not a procrastinator, I must say that every time I began either the school year or the university year, I always said, I have this brand new school year. Now I don't want to remain behind with anything, with any subject. It punctually happened, and I said, I will play some video games. Oh, now I will go out, I will do this. And eventually I always remained behind in something. Not dramatically, but still enough to bother me, right? And have that stain that I had to eliminate, to erase on my grades. So literally here, you should be counting the days, right? You should say, I should literally, mathematically, split this time into 3, the number of exams you wanted to, and work every single day with this internal timing, in which you have to do different things, as we will see now, and not necessarily sticking to the timeline, because that's something personally never done. and not just because I procrastinated and did, but because, of course, your preparation will always turn out to be different from what you expected it would be, right? Either in terms of, like, for example, I always took the entire time I needed, right, and divided for this, this various sections. Then maybe it took actually less time to do the thing, right? So that is how I basically allowed myself to, to release a bit of tension, to maybe invest a bit of time in something else that I had to do better, right? And especially because when you start preparing the exam, there are things that you learn well, and others don't, that you have to repeat, you have to, understand better, to work better on. So there are, taking one exam, and this eventually overlaps with the others, but it combines with the others, but it's taken in particular consideration. Methodologically speaking, from my point of view, there was one moment. That is, you take the books, you read them, and you make a synthesis of them. You might say, "Oh no, are you that guy? I don't want to make all of that work." You must have to, right? You must do it, because that's the only way you're going to ever learn the thing, right? If you think that just skipping through the lines and thinking just to encircle or to highlight, to make all this, schemes, those, at least for me, have never ever worked, right? And this is probably a summary, right? It's not like the entire thing, but the beauty of it, and if you do it, at this point, personal computers are disappearing, because simple-minded people are fine just with smartphones, and it seems as if that's the only thing that they need. You can't make a university exam without a proper computer in your hands. You just take a doc file and you start writing quite easily. At the beginning, I did it with my hands. I simply wrote with a pencil. I remember, but my hands were also, tired. I couldn't write at some point, so just type it. It's much faster. It took me years to learn it. This tells you how much it takes, even historically speaking, for changes to happen, right? Even when the evidence is there, and just write, a simple phrase, a concise one, and start, adding and getting through the books and saying and noting what you think is important, which isn't a random thing. Usually, especially if you study history, you want to know exactly when, who did something, would it what, how, why, when, right? The usual 4W, the 5Ws, like in journalism. That why does this, all the connections that you need. So you get this thing done. Like, how much time does it take to summarize a book of 200 pages? Right? You can't do it like in 10 days, right? Even less. Like, it really depends how well you do it. Usually, taking time pays, because you underline the good thing. Otherwise, what happens is that you get this thing, and you realize it doesn't quite make sense, does it? There are certain things that you skipped, and you need to see better, or others that you wrote it, you don't quite remember what they meant. So you have to go back on the book, and it's a good idea to usually also put a brief, like a note, say, I took this from this page, so that you can go back, and then that will get used to have a dialogue with the text. Like, you will read it, and you will look at it, it's not easy to understand a book, generally speaking. It's entering someone else's mind and trying to make sense of it, right? And overall, however, if you get, of course, you will never make a copy of the book or know the book by heart, knowing everything is written in there. But it's very important in this sense also to be complete. Like, never skip a concept, right? Of course, a book has many ways of explaining the thing, but the important thing is it's gravitating around one concept that holds the whole discussion, right? So naturally, you have also to understand what this discussion is about, and that's the line that connects various concepts, right? And you will have this simple files. There will be no more, like for one book, I presume, like 2 or 3 pages, like I usually wrote very, very tiny letters, because the best thing, at least for me, psychologically and visually, is to, to have under control all this information in one page, so it can be very thick. I know many people, get headache for that. I don't, and you can also zoom and going back and forth with that, for that matter. So you just have the compact, close, precise information you have summed up from the text. This thing, let's say it's 3-4 books, so this thing will be something like 10-12 pages long with all the books together. You have this thing, you maybe print it, or if you don't want to stare at the screen, and you just start repeating, right? The best thing is actually to do it on the screen, because you can and you will change this. So once you have made the summary, right, you will change the thing in the text over time. You underlined it, you can highlight and point out, and especially things you tend to forget, right? You can make bigger, so you will not forget. You will forget what you actually knew fairly well at the beginning, and you will remember the other thing instead afterwards. But this is the first part. The second part is obviously repeating it, right? Repeating it is, I don't know why I usually prefer. It's better to repeat than to summarize at some point, but the two things go in parallel. Because while you repeat, you're making a speech, right? It's more or less what you will say to the professor when you will be examined. So you can speak. You must speak, right? You can't just. Of course, most of the work becomes mental, like say, okay, yeah, I know this thing. I will be able to repeat it, but you should properly repeat what you still don't know. You should take these chunks of text and starting like a flow, like I'm doing these videos right now. You have to think that you are in front of an audience. You're in front of many people. Usually, this is how I used to do it, and say, I have to show I know this thing, right? I have to prove I'm informed. I'm making a point, and this is exactly what you will be asked to do during the examination. Right, this thing can go, usually, I don't remember how many times I used to repeat before the exam. It takes a while as well, because 10 or 12 pages, so with such dense information, they can take 2 or 3 days to repeat altogether. Naturally, I think we'll get speedier over time, because every time what you're kind of repeating, but you should still fix it in your mind. This repetition is necessary, because that's the only way you can memorize it, right? And you have to be very precise. You have to learn the difficult terms. You have to learn the broader connections. You have to put yourself, let's say, at the level of the same author, right? The professor will notice that. Will notice the fact that you have interiorized this knowledge, right? And the beauty of it is that, in fact, you don't know the book by heart, but you have developed a capacity to expose it, to which implies also its understanding, because you haven't learned by heart the summary either, and you are capable of argumenting it, right? Of, let's say, criticize it autonomously. You can even add personally. I add a lot of stuff, right? Even like you see when I make the videos, I always digress and I start saying things that, of course, you can't digress an exam, particularly because you should be answering what you're being demanded. But for example, if you're capable of making connections with other things that are pertinent to the topic, well, that is, can tell, very appreciated, right? I hope to make exams to university students in a few months, but from next year at least, because this thing also of the pandemics will stop, hopefully. But the point here is properly to realize that who is examining you usually doesn't have any good reason but to help people who have studied, right? Professors like people who study, right? They don't like people who, wherever you are, it's an intelligence test, right? Many people make it just a matter of personality. From the student's side, it's mostly say, oh, maybe the professor hates me for some reason. The professor from the other side actually like you as long as you are an intelligent person, which is what education teaches you to appreciate, right? So of course the persona is very important. Also presenting yourself in a decent way is particularly important. Discipline is of dramatic importance in general. I think still in my university, in my country, these things theoretically work. But of course, there is, especially from the first years, all this, masses of young people who really have no idea why the hell they are there in the first place. And sometimes it's very, like those examples I made before, like it's very difficult to take, given that the average is like that. Doing better than the average is usually a very good passport, right, for promotion. And so it's highly advisable, right? Repeating this stuff as before the exam, when, how, well, usually a good thing to do also, just for the skill that I used to do, for example, was to try to summarize all of these books before the exam session, right? But also when the exam session starts, usually you will start making, if you want to make as many exams as possible to finish the degree early, you will probably take the first I don't know how to say it in English, but when the day of the exam is, that this exam session is basically, like as we were saying before, 1 month and a half, 2 months, in which there are certain specific days, right? In the other days nothing happens, but in which you have to decide, there are usually 2 or 3, in which of them you will give the exam. And that's where the strategic game of reserves is played. Like, ever since I was in school, I like to see I was as if I was preparing the exam as was preparing an army, right? I had to test if my men were marching in orderly fashion, if my ranks were solid enough, if I could resist to enemy fire. We went against this terrible thing, but nobody knew how it would. It was a war, right? It was very fascinating to see it in this way. And the more you study, the more you repeat, the more you know how your armies fit, right? Have you seen in von Clausewitz the military virtue of the army? And that's what your thoughts are like, and the way you answer the exam is how you, commander of the army, acts during the battle. Right, the rest is all campaign, it's all preparation, right? And that's exactly it, right? The exam session is the strategical seat, before is the outer, it's probably the campaign actually, and the waging of the army. I always like to see it in this way, and of course it takes some times before to start. You may not have enough time. Most of the times I went to the exams prepared, but it's only basic. I actually always went prepared, or, well, not completely, to tell you all. In fact, it was those few times which I kind of did bad. But I must say that it's only by the very last master degree exam that I said I got it. Like, I'm sure that I will make this exam right, and I will be promoted the day, before going to do it, right? All the other times was something that I knew I had left behind, right? And of course, the earlier this was, and the more I was prepared. But that's probably what university teaches you, is the idea of is teaching you how to put your thoughts together in a presentable fashion. What do you think people go to university for? To learn, 3,000 books by heart? It just gives you structure, and especially in a subject like history, that's fundamentally the building you will have to fill eventually with your own material, right? By learning on your own. Throughout all the years of university, actually, I don't think I have read a lot, because I was always preparing exams. Like, it was a very demanding thing to me, because, it was several hundred pages every time to prepare, like some month, basically, a couple of months, one after the other. I mean, it's not easy, right? It takes a lot of time, actually, and you always have the sensation that you're not filling the gaps fast enough, that this army is still, loosely put together, and that it will not resist to the enemy onslaught, right? And that's the sensation you start developing, right? And the more exams you do, the more you study, the better you perform in this regard. So that, as many things in life, the more you do it, the better it comes. And mentally speaking, this is especially true, right? You get specialized in this mentally, right? And of course, until you don't do it, you cannot understand properly what it is, and that's what the problem we're talking about at the beginning is really about, because it's when you start university, you have literally no idea. You know how to study, for in school, which is usually smaller stuff. It's less, precise in some ways. You are in a different environment. University is way more like, it's way colder, especially in the first years. Nobody quite cares about you. Like in the later years, professors know you, you know what's the business like, and therefore it's you're tendency, the more it goes on, and less students there are, because most people actually don't arrive till the master even. So they either just get the bachelor, they don't even finish that, or they abandon for some other reason. Sometimes they come back after many years, but the best thing, of course, is also do this thing in one shot, especially if you're young and you have expectations of career or something. Do not waste your years, especially your first years are the best ones. If you are smart and if you can study well and do a good job, do it, concentrate on it, right? Because life will be easier afterwards, right? Because when you're young, yes, you feel you're cool, you're full of energies, you want to conquer the world, and that's exactly what you should employ your energies for. But life is better afterwards, when you're a bit more mature and you understand more, and therefore you can do better stuff. You can meet people that you like, and not just being an idiot with them, and that this all helps. Like, university helps you to properly plan your life, which is very important. Right? It shouldn't be disregarded as. Unfortunately, many universities are losing that. I've seen it. There are certain universities that are even vicious places where students are just lured in, and especially when it's all about money. I personally think I come from the only country in the world where the public education is better than the private one, right? But the reality can be very grim, and I understand those people say, but after all, university is a waste of time. Is it? Right? Well, it depends on what you have to do. Of course, if you don't plan any anything besides that, in terms of things that can make you access through that secondary education to other places, well, yeah, but at the end of the day, you may not know, even at 18 years old, what you will want like in 10 years. After which you will say, okay, yeah, I wanted just to have fun and find random jobs, and now I'm 30 and I don't even have a degree. What do I do now? Girls do not talk to me because they think I'm a loser. These are all things that are coming to you at some point, right? It's very important, especially for men, to be accomplished in their late 20s in some ways, because otherwise, society will reject them. It's very harsh, but it happens, right? And it's sad, as many things. And so there is also another thing that as you grow smarter, you tend to want to be with people that are smart as you. So even if you want to start a family, for example, it's easier to do it with someone reliable if you are also a reliable person, right? And that's also extremely important. I don't know. It of course it bears with itself a greater responsibility. Like studying all those years, learning all this. I don't think it's. First of all, it's not easy, right? It may seem, individually speaking, you say, well, it's just kids learning stuff on books, right? But it does require an effort, a constancy, a consistency, a discipline, a commitment. These are things that discipline you, morally speaking, and it's very, very important to be like that, in my opinion. That's also what a job does, right? But a job may be not necessarily giving you the perspective of the thing in itself, right? It could do it as long as you that specific craft or employment, whatever it is, and retribution, compensation, and career can be, right? So there are of course jobs that can do that for you, but as far as I understand, I've never still here at this point, but as far as I understand, degrees now are required more or less everywhere, right? So it's become almost mandatory in some fields. I can't think exactly of fields that are not particularly well retributed. Aside from, you start a business on your own, you make a fortune. Good luck with that. I wish you that kind of success, but it's also kind of rare, and it can be mainstream to fall back in line sometimes in life and obey. I'm just thinking, it's hip to be straight, or what's that other movie about? It's very famous about those British guys that eventually, whatever. But it's objectively fun. I mean, it's what our civilization has brought us to require to ourselves. So in a way, it's not to be disregarded. Yeah. And I know there are bitter feelings about this because there is a lot of competition about this stuff. I think that it's not even about we were speaking of motivation as the single most important thing. Well, motivation can even be negative. I partly, of course, started university because I wanted to be successfully accepted. Like even if I said that with history, I wasn't searching for any fortune, let's say, but still, I wanted to do something with my life. So, of course, it's something, evidently, and I'm doing fairly well, right? I'm continuing this. For example, even with Schwerpunkt, I feel like I am able to improve what I've been telling on Schwerpunkt relatively to the Filmkrieg has dramatically helped me for my work, and I realized that if I hadn't started my work, I would have not started this thing either. So this opens to you a lot of other accessory perspectives, ideas, plans that you would have not had if you just thought that it was just a matter of not, I can say wasting time, but simply something that spoiled kids do, right? And I can't tell you it's not the case, because I've seen people that of course worked together with studying were astonishingly like I would have never taken it, right? To me, I'm terribly lazy at certain levels. I'm kind of spoiled, so I I would have not done it. But of course, I've placed a lot of attention in what I've done at this point, and exactly because I had enough time, maybe I arrived to do what I do, and I will hopefully get somewhere else along the way. So this was my life choice. That there are infinite ways a person can do that. There are the most astonishing ones, but it's obvious that you should see, in this sense, the degree, or maybe university, whatever it is, a job of any kind, a military service, as an opportunity to develop yourself, so that you can be ever more in control of yourself, and you will find people that will not want you to do so. Right, you will always find attrition in this regard, but there is another sense in this. The more you improve, and the more you can respond to that, the more you can deal with problems, right? The more powerful you become, right? There is probably power deriving from this, from knowledge. As we were saying before, for reasons of marketing, now it seems that the cool person is the person who makes a lot of money without having actually done anything. Because that's kind of lucky, and only cunning people are lucky, and those who take shortcuts will make it. Well, what actually the entire history of civilization, including our own, shows is that the overwhelming majority of successful people are people who have made it through a lot of work. It's based on competence. That's how human societies work, fundamentally. Right? It's a tendential line. There's always the one that makes it in other ways. You can win to the lottery, right? But still, the overwhelming majority of people that are in charge, that have power, that are successful, that control, that manage, that have a responsibility, are people who have earned that through very hard work, right? And that should always be in everybody's mind since they are kids. Like, there is no way to even say, I mean, even if the world was unjust, even if this hierarchy, as some people say, it's intrinsically evil or whatever, the only way you can make it to the top and change things is to properly raising through the ranks, right? This is always been true, right? In the harshest of realities, that whoever increases, whoever is able to renew himself through this individual improvement will rise, right? And it does pass through that. So it may seem strange that I talk about this when saying how to prepare exams, right? But there is this constant that should accompany you at all times, right? Never lose a day. Maybe, lose a day. One day, go out, spend a beautiful journey outside, go, at sea and countryside, mountain, whatever you believe. Make sport, vent, right? It's extremely important to sleep well, but also to, I shouldn't speak because I abandoned sport exactly when I started studying university because I didn't have time. That's also very important. And as we were saying before, studying, but vent yourself. Don't be physically indolent, right? Always keep fit. Try to set your life on this track that allows you to progress by keeping control of everything. The more you can, try to do better every day. There is always this sense, after all, almost of frustration in the competition, right? When I said that objectively university is boring, it's, in my opinion, many people will say it's not the case, but in my opinion, objectively, it is very boring. Just like school is very boring. But still, you kind of like that. I mean, you still do it because you kind of understand what's the point. It's boring because it takes a lot of time. It makes you so, but it gives you something back, right? When you finish this, right? I must say, every time I was there, I said, I can't wait. This is over, right? But when you finish that, you get a bit moved to look back at the thing and said, after all, I had gotten used to that. But there's the next step, and you kind of feel proud of having done it, right? Even if I constantly spit on the fact that, according to me, bachelors and masters and whatever now suck, and I don't say it because I think I haven't worked when I wrote my own, but simply because I see that much better could be done, and that the system, generally speaking, is very lax, especially from in terms of the criteria of evaluation, that only by themselves could easily improve society dramatically, right? If just it was a bit tougher to pass exams, we would have a better society, because we would select the people who actually are capable of doing the thing that it need to be done. I hate as hell those things that, that every person has his own different way, different standards. It's nonsense. We are all human beings. We all function in one way. We could be more or less predisposed in terms of life experience, nature, character, whatever. But if you tell me to resolve a second-grade disequation, like every 17-year-old should be able to do that, because if he or she doesn't, they simply are wasted as brains, right? Because we're just underestimating. We're being far too lenient with this idea that everybody should find her own way, Yes, by character, by whatever you're inclined to, you can choose what's going to be your study, your job, and that's obvious. But the criteria evaluation should be tough, because otherwise, what kind of people we will have? Surely not tough people in charge of our world, and we do need tough people in charge of our world. responsible people know pretty well what they have to do and do not have to have many doubts about it. So that's why I stress this consistency in saying I will work, right? I will work even during vacations, for example. I mean, not that, if you go abroad or whatever, you go to the beach, you will take books with you. But I mean, Christmas holidays. Yeah, you will keep. I usually always kept studying throughout. Aside from they give you since school homework exactly for the holidays. So in a time you will have to make them. I will not work on Christmas. I will not work on Christmas Eve. But on December 23rd or 27th, I keep working, right? And that's otherwise how can I be prepared afterwards? And there is this constant economical idea of advantaging yourself. Of saying, well, I've earned a day, right? And I have a brand new day of my life that is not very long, indeed, that I can use maybe to earn another one, right? And you can do this throughout all your life to earn years at the end of the day, at the end of the year, at that point. But you understand what I mean, and without this constant commitment, you get nowhere. And sometimes it takes a lifetime, of course. I mean, that's very evident. That's why also usually older people are in charge, because they know what's the thing, right? Unless it doesn't require, maybe just a younger, physical thing. But, mentally speaking, you need the experienced person, the competent person that has seen more, right? And not being blindlessly revered just to age or title or whatever, but simply realizing that there is a logic to it that you should understand in this enormous effort. It seems today like nobody wants to make efforts anymore. You want to pass exams without studying. You want just, you feel too stressed, right? This time, for example, well, okay, I shouldn't be talking about this because it's kind of weird, but this sense of I don't know, we've been set, for what happened with coronavirus, right? And the fact that we had to stay a lot of months closed in our houses. My colleagues have lamented this fact that the PhD should contemplate, of course, even a kind of healthy approach for studying and just staying at home all these months. Basically, is not healthy at all. Like, it brings to alienation, especially to work with digital technology all the time and so on. That's personally what I do all the time. Look, I mean, I've been doing these videos, for example, for lots and lots of time, right? I've been on vacations, now with my ex. Also, I had this kind of commitment, had this different things going on, but now I just wanted to do this. I don't think it was particularly alienating, right? I don't think that I'm becoming crazy at this time. Usually crazy people don't notice that, and that's the thing that upsets me. But generally speaking, no, I think I'm pretty consistent to say, okay, yeah, I've been working a lot, and aside from, I use Schwerpunkt to vent. I told you many times, this is just a parenthesis that I make during my daily studying, my daily research, and it's a way to to schedule even here to do something else next to the studying. It's important to distract yourself. I mean, I realize that this is still about history most of the time. It's as if it was studying, but that tells you how much I love this thing in absolute terms, that even when I stop studying history, I still like to talk about history, and I like doing it. Yeah, maybe I miss, especially during lockdown, to go out, I live next to a beautiful park to tour, but sometimes to go running or just walking or whatever, just to be in the green. But at the same time, it's an effort you can make. Right, think just about those kids who were complaining because they couldn't go outside during the lockdown because they wanted to play football. Think about Anna Frank, that remained 3 years closed in her wherever at the top of her house. We are humans. We can't make sacrifices. That's not that, that Anna Frank's example, she was obliged, of course, by the terrible circumstances. But I mean, come on, like we have a huge potential as human beings to do an enormous amount of stuff. Let's not become soft. Let's brutalize ourselves every once in a while. It sounds pretty bad as a line, doesn't it? But it's really what I mean. I mean, how can you? We see it constantly, even in military history and stuff. How can you impose discipline if not with violence? The world needs discipline. A lot, right? A lot of problems would be solved by discipline. You know why the counter argument to this has been made just in our culture, generally speaking, in the world, and this is, I can't even say it's just in the West, it's everywhere, because we have become richer, fatter, and lazier, right? And that's normal. That's what we are programmed by to do genetically. Also, animals work like this. If you don't have stimulus, a need, you don't have any reason to make an effort. That's the problem in our society. We become more lenient because times are easier. But this doesn't mean that in times in which the world is increasingly more complex, we actually will not be faced with very pressing problems that are needed exactly to the fact that we have not made this freaking effort of educating ourselves dramatically, as we will be needed to, like in, I'm sure by 2000 and maybe not 100, 2200, we will have like 20 per the amount of education we have today enforced. Like, I can't, as you know, I don't have a deterministic view of history. Maybe I even doubt actually that this will happen, but the point will be recognized, I presume, sometime, that the more complex this world is, and the more we need minds that are capable to organize it. Right. In pre-industrial times, you needed to do other stuff, right? There was even way more, imposing in terms of moral forces and the intelligence required to calculate all what was needed in that complicated system as it was. But there was not this enormous imbalance between what the world was and what you needed to know in order to make it work, right? Today there is, right? And the gap between the two things can be filled just by knowledge, education, right? And not the education, just as a social policy to save people from, misery, as an emergential situation, which is perfectly positive thing to do. But we're talking about extra education imposed to people to make this freaking thing work without major systemic imbalances that will kill millions of people, right? And this is what already at this point actually we could use for a change, because lots of things that happened just like in the last 20 years could have been prevented in that regard, right? But aside from this, we will talk about this stuff on another occasion. As usual, I actually discuss mostly about lots of other things aside from the one I plan to do. But I think in perspective, this is very important, because I can even tell you just the method, and then not explaining you why it is important, or why it works, or why you should insist, and why you should keep yourself under, during all this stuff, until you haven't finished the thing, right? Because it's not even a matter of, it's an artificial use of this, right? You're not forced to study that much today, right? But if you were, you would do better than other people. You will be richer, more successful, you will have a better life, right? And that's not because of the money, or we can buy with that, but it's because you have what it takes to get the money. And that's the interesting aspect of it, because you have produced value. That's the point at the end of the story. It's not about tricking something, stealing money from someone's pocket. I think, exploiting people's stupidity for making money is perfectly beautiful, and everybody should do it, because that's truly a just thing in the economy of the free world and a free market. But there is probably a a discipline that you need to attain in order to get to that and to actually produce that value, right? That's it. And I know sometimes I end up with something brutal and extreme, but think about it. I think it's very contextual in all of this. Alright, so for now we'll stop it here. We will naturally, if you have questions of any kind, I can make videos even about these topics that I presume can be useful to someone, then maybe they are not. But anyhow, for now I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.